If you look at most pirates during the Golden Age, they were content with going on short trips, stealing a bit of money, and then going home to blow it all away on rum and women. For this purpose, they didn't need anything bigger than a sailboat, the likes of a sloop or brigantine. But there were pirates that wanted to achieve more. They wanted to capture large merchants, blockade cities, or travel across the ocean. For these purposes, they needed a much bigger boat. Huge ships that could travel far and fast, carry large crews, and lots of cannon. In the right hands, these vessels had the ability to destabilize local commerce or even cause international crises. In this video we will cover the ship that you never wanted to meet at sea, the pirate man-of-war. There's a lot of confusion concerning pirate ship types, so I want to spend the first part of the video clearing out some of the terminology. Much of the confusion has been caused by video games like Assassin's Creed 4. The problem with video games is that it's a bunch of code. Code has to be logical and linear, which the real world very rarely is, let alone pre-industrial history. This means that games have to simplify history and terminology, and often just get things wrong. Assassin's Creed 4 has like 4 or 5 ship types, all of which are inaccurate, and too few for the extreme variety present in the Caribbean alone. The game has led a lot of people to believe that man-of-war refers exclusively to these massive ships armed with lots of cannon. For one, pirates never used ships this size. These ships are called ships of the line because they were used in line formations during large-scale sea battles. Before the mid-1700s, these battles only really occurred in Europe, so you wouldn't find these ships in the colonial regions. Neither were they practical to use for pirates, because they were sluggish and required very large crews. Anyway, man-of-war just meant warship, or specifically, any seagoing vessel outfitted for combat. I've never seen the word warship used in any period documents, by the way. So, man-of-war could really refer to any combat vessel, both big and small. For example, a group of buccaneers in 1680 were attacked by 3 men-of-war near Panama. These men-of-war were 2-masted barks armed with 6 guns or less. A year later, the same group of buccaneers were attacked by another trio of men-of-war. But these men-of-war were large ships, armed with 10 or more cannon, and weighing 6 to 800 tons. The term was also used in reference to pirates, such as when they made their own men-of-war. Captain Charles Johnson writes that Lowe took 2 or 3 and 20 French vessels, and one of them with 22 guns he manned with pirates, making a sort of man-of-war of her, with which he scoured the harbors and banks of Newfoundland. Pirates themselves used the word man-of-war in reference to the largest or most powerful ship of their fleet. The aforementioned buccaneers referred to their flagship as a man-of-war. Though she was large and very fast, she lacked any cannons whatsoever, but more on that later. Blackbeard's pirates allegedly referred to their Queen Anne's Revenge as their man-of-war, indicating that this was a lasting tradition that survived throughout the Golden Age. Additionally, the Queen's accompanying sloops were termed privateers. They would perform reconnaissance and chase down smaller targets. Her supply ship was classified as a tender. Tenders were usually bad sailors and only reserved for carrying supplies and the unhealthy or wounded. Now we can tackle the next term, frigate. Again, most people think it refers to only one thing. Usually that is the Napoleonic era definition of a light warship. And during the 1600s, frigate meant 2 things. The first meaning was similar to the popular image. That was a light naval warship used for scouting and cruising. Cruising meaning hunting for stray enemy ships and merchants. Privateering, pretty much. These ships were first built in the Netherlands during the early 1600s, and soon the design spread to England. They were light and had sleek lines, and as a good distinction from the frigates of the late 1700s, they had their forecastle and quarterdeck raised above the main deck. Many times they were equipped with oars, enabling them to row in calm winds. The second definition of frigate refers to any type of ship that is frigate-built. This means that the ship, regardless of type, was built for speed and with sleek lines. Sleek lines allowed the ship to carve more easily through the ocean, like a knife compared to a shovel. Frigate-built ships were often used as men-of-war, but were sometimes merchants, especially slave ships. Lastly, we can move on to the meaning of ship itself. As you might have realized, people in the period were really not strict with how they used words. Man-of-war could mean both a bark and a frigate. The same went for ships. Some buccaneers referred to any masted vessel as a ship, including sloops and barks. But in the strictest sense of the word, ship means specifically a full-rigged ship, meaning that it has 3 or more square-rigged masts. Now, some period authors did differentiate between ships and vessels. Now, I tend to use the words quite interchangeably as well, because it really doesn't matter, and I think most pirate fans overcomplicate pirate ships anyway. But technically, this video encompasses full-rigged ships as a whole. That class encompasses a lot of different vessels, I guess, that share the same rigging, but vary in hull construction and other details that most people of the time barely cared to mention. But it includes frigates, merchantmen, guineamen, flutes. Still, pirates pretty much use them all the same way, and as we'll find out, modify them in a streamlined fashion. With these definitions out of the way, we can get into the nitty-gritty details of full riggers. It's kind of a meme that large ships were naturally slower. Sure, large ships were heavier, which impacted the speed, but they also carried more sails to compensate. The rigging wasn't easy to manage by any means, however. I've heard it said that a full-rigged ship was the most complicated machinery of their day, and that might be a point. They were hard to sail and required not only a skilled crew, but a skilled navigator. This is why pirates would often kidnap navigators to occupy the high-ranking and important role of sailing master. It's also why the sailing master was one of the most authoritative positions aboard a pirate ship. The complication of the ship's rigging is part of the reasons why many pirates just didn't bother getting one. An unskilled captain commanding a full-rigged ship could spell doom. Samuel Bellamy was very good at commanding piraguas and sloops, but when he got command of a proper ship, he led her into a storm and went under. A similar thing happened to Blackbeard. He was by no means a bad sailor or commander, but he managed to sink his Queen Anne's Revenge in an accident, which a skilled captain could have avoided. The ship's wheel is a very nifty invention that made navigation much easier. It's very iconic in pirate mythos, but sadly it didn't appear until the rump end of the pirate era. I don't know when it was invented, but it only became common in the English Navy around 1715. This meant that it probably took a few years for it to spread to other organizations and types of vessels. Small vessels used a tiller, that's just a big stick connected directly to the rudder, used on everything from rowboats to sloops. Proper ships utilized a whipstaff. It was hard to steer a ship with a whipstaff, but that didn't prevent pirates like Bartholomew Sharp from being excellent navigators. He managed to steer the 400-ton Trinity through frozen storms, from Guayaquil to Barbados, in just 4 months. Speed wasn't necessarily a problem for ships, but it had other issues. Full-rigged ships sailed best with the wind at their backs, so that the sail area could catch the most wind. In optimal conditions, the best pirate ships were able to reach a speed of around 14 knots. In case of poor winds, many full-rigged cruisers carried large oars known as sweeps. In my upcoming interview with the pirate historian Benderson Little, I asked him a bit about these oars.
And even basically commerce raiders, privateers, and men of war, up to about 40 guns or so, would have sweeps on the lower deck. They would stow the sweeps from the overhead, the carlings, basically, when not in use. Yeah. Smaller vessels could just stow them, on gallows in the waist.
These types of ships were often called galleys, oared frigates, or galley frigates. And these were some of the best pirate ships available. They either had a deck built entirely for the oars, or had the oar ports located between the gun ports on the gun deck. Whilst we might imagine that the pirates rowed their ship from benches.
Yeah, they seem to think that they probably stood up to do the rowing. They probably had, I would imagine they had some benches, but it looks like they put as many people, up to 3 people per sweep, if you could get them on it. There's also some indications. There's still debate on exactly how the oars were secured so that they wouldn't fall through the sweep ports. There's also some indication that they would sometimes run a line from the basically from the spindle at the end of it always, so any extra crew could be hauling on that line as well. It had to be coordinated in practice.
A full-rigged ship could be constructed in a lot of ways. When it came to the rigging, pirates favored rigging that could provide as much speed as possible. Topsails were especially important. Many merchants lacked topsails and large amounts of sail, since it required larger crews that needed to be paid. As for the hull, the fastest ships were sleek and had rounded ends. This allowed them to cut through the water like a dagger, without the water being blocked at any point. Square-stern ships were most popular during this era, and it impacted speed. To compensate for the energy and power from the sails, full-rigged ships had to be large. Cruising ships ferried by pirates typically weighed between 200 to 500 tons burthen. Whilst this is much lighter than the really big ships, the really big warships, this was much larger than a typical pirate vessel, and the size had some disadvantages. It was harder to hide. Since it had a deep draft, you couldn't sail it into shallow waters and rivers, which limited potential escape routes. It also made it easier to run aground, see the Queen Anne's Revenge, for example. Maintaining weight and stability became a much bigger question. If you didn't have sufficient weight or ballast in the bottom of the ship, it might turn over and capsize. The heavier cannons were kept on the lower decks, and spare guns were often used as ballast. The advantage of size was that it allowed the pirates to carry more stuff. This included crewmen, cargo, and cannons. This allowed for more ambitious operations and longer expeditions, which we'll discuss later on. Since full-rigged ships were such complicated pieces of machinery, you wouldn't find them constructed everywhere. It was rare to find a proper shipyard in the New World. Their rarity is part of the reasons why pirates seldom used them. So how did pirates acquire them, and what did they do to them afterwards? In extremely rare cases, they built their own ship. Now, no actual pirate built their own full-rigged ship. There were plenty of legal privateers that had ships built for them, but they were seldom built specifically for cruising. Usually they were fast merchant ships, converted for that purpose. The one exception is the Adventure Galley. Theoretically, this was the best pirate ship of all time, since it was purpose-built for sea rowing. It had a fast rigging, a sleek, dagger-like hull, a flushed profile, and a deck for both cannons and oars. She was really everything a pirate ever needed, but sadly she didn't see too much action. I'll have to cover her more in a separate video. Then the pirates could acquire a full rigger by mutineering, such as in the case of Henry Avery's 46-gun Fancy, formerly Charles II. Finally, and most commonly, they could acquire a full rigger by capturing it through combat. This was the case for most pirates that captained ships. They started out with smaller vessels, before capturing and commandeering a proper ship. Take Sharp's Trinity, for example. Initially she was a Spanish ship called La Santísima Trinidad. She was docked near the Bay of Panama when the Buccaneers defeated a major force just nearby. After a short skirmish, they captured the Trinidad herself, and made her their flagship, their man-of-war. When pirates captured a ship, they could modify her to fit their purposes. The Trinity, for example, was very high in the stern. She had a large roundhouse, which slowed her down by adding windage and weight. So the Buccaneers cut it down. Additionally, they removed all the carved works, which were pretty, but they only added to the weight. Pirates were very pragmatic after all. They strived for making their ships flushed, meaning that the weather deck was flat from stem to stern. This reduced weight and windage, improving the ship's speed. They would knock down the bulkheads, internal partitions that kept cargo from drifting around. Finally, they would boost the ship's firepower. Additional swivel guns were installed across the ship's railing. Additional gun ports were cut in the sides and kitted out with whatever guns the pirates had available. Spare cannon were used as ballast. So as a summary of pirate modifications, they strived to improve firepower and make them as lean, light, and fast as possible. The sack of Cartagena in 1687 was a joint operation between the French Navy and filibusters. The filibusters provided an experienced fighting force, whereas the Navy provided additional soldiers and heavy firepower. Their bomb vessels and ships of the line were able to batter the Spanish fortifications into submission. This incident inspired Rafael Sabatini to include a similar scene in his famous book, Captain Blood. The Buccaneers used their ships to attack a fort. This scene was later adapted to the big screen, and the idea of pirate ships going up against coastal forts has become a staple. Whilst it was possible for pirates to attack forts that were weakly armed and had small garrisons, most forts weren't. Even the largest pirate ships had rather weak cannon that struggled at putting a dent in even another ship, let alone a stone wall. Meanwhile, the heavy fort cannon would reduce them to matchwood. Another staple of pirate media is large sea battles fought with cannons. Now, piracy is all about getting as much money as possible from as little effort as possible. So optimally, you don't want any damage or loss to your own equipment. Or the opposition's for that matter, because you can steal it. Getting into sea battles with cannons posed a huge risk of inflicting unnecessary and unprofitable damage. Pirates were, for the most part, armed robbers. They did everything they could just to scare their targets into submission. That was one of the good qualities of a proper ship. Its size and cannons could scare pretty much any merchant into striking their colors. But even if you had to get into a fight, cannons weren't the preferred weapon. The aforementioned Trinity didn't carry a single one, yet the buccaneers were able to take great prizes at sea. Their advantage was that they always had a larger crew than their opponents, allowing them to just pepper them into submission with muskets. Even when pirate ships had cannons, they often loaded them with just random junk that could kill the enemy crew and damage the rigging, but leave the ship itself unscathed. Of course, there are some incidents of epic sea battles. The best example, and pretty much the only example, comes from the life of Laurens de Graaf. Arguably, he was a real-life movie star. He was tall, handsome and blonde, and he was always followed by a group of musicians. Interestingly enough, we have an actual eyewitness illustration of the two ships that de Graaf engaged. The flagship was a Dutch-built Santo Cristo de Burgos, of 650 tons and 56 guns. The Vice Admiral was also Dutch-built, the Nuestra Señora de la Concepción, of 52 guns and 550 tons. The Graaf's ships probably looked similar to the Admiral's, being likewise a Dutch-built Spaniard, like most Spanish ships of the time, which he had captured and renamed Neptune. Hardly a better name for a ship. The Neptune found herself trapped to leeward by the Spaniards, and was unable to gain the weather gauge or escape. Nonetheless, de Graaf ordered her to lie by and prepare for battle. When battle began the next morning, the Spanish ship split in two, intending to blast the Neptune from both sides, similar to the end of the third Pirates of the Caribbean movie. Now, this might seem like a good thing since you can shoot them from both angles, but it's actually a very poor decision, since it not only means that the trapped ship can fire upon you, it can fire on both of your sides, and you're going to hit your own side as well. As the Neptune sailed between the Spaniards, he ordered both starboard and larboard to fire simultaneously. After the broadsides discharged, he ordered off a musket volley. The muskets alone were said to have disabled 50 Spaniards. For the next 12 hours, the Neptune maneuvered so that the enemy could never bring two broadsides to bear on her at once. The Spaniards were scared to board, knowing the boldness of the defenders. At nightfall, the ships parted ways and recovered their wounds. This battle was likewise adapted by Rafael Sabatini into Captain Blood, and when the book was put on the big screen, huge sea battles became another staple of pirate media that we see every day, without anyone going back to the original sources and being bothered with portraying how most pirates actually fought. Pirates in the Caribbean operate around small islands where they could easily stop by to rest, recuperate, and restock on supplies. Thus, they didn't need a large ship that could carry lots of cargo. They were just cumbersome around these small islands. However, at the end of the 1710s, when pirates were increasingly chased out of the Caribbean, we see more of them adopting larger ships instead. This allowed them to carry more provisions and stay at sea for longer periods of time. Even if their necessities ran low, the pirates could steal it from prices at sea. Most of the produce that pirates stole in this era were life necessities: food, clothing, tools, materials, and of course, alcohol. To the pirates, the ship was essentially a floating base, since they had recently lost their permanent base in Nassau, on New Providence Island in the Bahamas. These pirates would abandon the Caribbean and escape to West Africa or Madagascar. Undertaking such long and ambitious journeys almost required a big ship. Large ships were likewise favored by many of the Madagascar pirates during the War of Spanish Succession, such as John Bowen, who commanded the 450-ton, 50-gun Speaker, once a slave ship. Another slave ship that became a large pirate ship was the Bachelor's Delight. Being captured in the 1680s, she was crewed by a company of buccaneers, and they used her to circumnavigate the world. The largest pirate ship of all time was probably the 700-ton Defense. She was once a Portuguese treasure ship, captured and commanded by Capitaine Olivier Levasseur, who equipped her with a whopping 70 cannon. I don't know if she partook in any major engagements, I'll have to research that for the video on her or Levasseur, but I know that Levasseur had her wrecked around 1724. Shortly after, much of his crew were massacred by natives. The biggest of thanks to my generous supporters over on Patreon. Cole Freer, Max Twick, 1660, Michael Jans, Rachel, Lockar, Dyer, Ted Levin, Flintlock, and Red Hate. Now, if you want to support me monetarily, please check out the links to PayPal and Patreon in the video description below. Otherwise, do give the video a like and a comment and share it with a friend. I'm not asking you to, I'm telling you to, so do it. Thank you for watching. Cheers!